Now listen, I know we're about to cover the Storybook series here, but I'm not going to begin to claim to be an expert of creative writing. That's not who I am. But thanks to today's sponsor, Skillshare, we can change that. By now, surely many of you have heard of Skillshare, and if you haven't, it is a great online learning community all about teaching yourself a ton of new creative skills. Take on a quest of tackling boredom, be a part of a like-minded community, and just let your creative ambitions run wild. There is so much to offer here. Yes, even creative writing. Listen, many of us are staying home right now, so taking on some of these more spontaneous acts of creativity definitely help break up some of the typical daily routine and alleviate stress. Stuff like this is very helpful in these times. Out of all of the classes I looked into, this is the one that really stuck out to me. Video on a Budget by Christopher Rhodes. Take it from me, working with cameras can be a pretty pricey endeavor, so it is important to take a look at your options without needing to, well, break the bank. The part about location scouting is what resonated with me the most. With the stuff that I typically do, you may not think it's all that important, but I can guarantee you, learning about the importance of lighting in your setup is something that cannot be understated. I genuinely think that it is very important to keep your mind active, always learning something new, and exploring your creative passions, and Skillshare offers an awesome avenue to do so. And what's really great is the first 1,000 of you to click the link in the description below, you will get a free 2-month trial of the premium membership, so you can immediately go and start exploring your creativity, and I highly recommend it. Once again, major thanks to today's sponsor, Skillshare, and now we talk about a blue hedgehog. From the mid to late 2000s, the world was so overloaded with Sonic the friggin' Hedgehog. Sure, it's easy to simply look at Sonic 06, laugh, and then call it a day. But man, there was honestly so much more than that. This era was definitely throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. The problem, though, was barely anything did. Sonic Rush was pretty cool, you know, writers had a really neat art style. The GBA port of Sonic 1, you know, that's one of the funniest things to ever grace the gaming landscape, so that's pretty cool. You have Gems Collection, that game finally brought Sonic the Fighters to home consoles. Oh boy. While a mainline title was getting really close to dropping, featuring a gameplay style that would resonate with so many fans around the world, one of the more prominent experimental attempts, despite Sega now pretending as if it never happened, is the Sonic Storybook Series. The Storybook Series, a pair of games that didn't get that Storybook Series title until Game 2, and then we never got Game 3 because both of these games sold poorly. A for effort, I guess. You know, the little page flap graphic they cooked up on Black Knight's cover is pretty cool. The premise behind these games is super easy to understand. Let's throw Sonic into the world of a storybook and see what happens. I mean, hey, it worked so well when Mario traveled through time, what could possibly go wrong here? It all began with a teaser trailer that had Sonic playing around with the fancy new Wii remote. I remember thinking this was pretty cool, honestly. This new controller technology and all the hype around it, it was still so mysterious, and to see a familiar character using one was pretty cool. Aw, check it out, Sonic's holding a controller. He's officially a gamer. The gamer hat in Sonic Forces suddenly makes a lot more sense. Initially titled Sonic Wildfire, the game was revealed at E3 2006, promising a very different experience than anything we've gotten prior, and less than 1 year later, with a brand new title, Sonic and the Secret Rings was unleashed in early 2007, only a few months into the Sonic 06 grieving process. And then, having a much less interesting pre-release history, Sonic and the Black Knight released 2 years later, and then the world immediately tried to move on. As much as a third game in the series based on something like Greek mythology would be really cool, clearly the world was not ready. They only started calling this the Storybook Series with this game too, so the whole thing is just pretty confusing. Whether or not this was an attempt to legitimately be creative, or just an excuse to reuse the back of a box art for 2 games, we may never know. But today, let's take a look back and see what lucky Wii owners were treated to, and just what caused this sub-series to die out before becoming a full-on trilogy. Spoilers, it's because the games aren't very good. Oh man, immediately you can tell Secret Rings is serious business. Look at the lag on the menu. Oh, that's a good sign. That's some blast processing right there. Okay, before we get too cynical here, I do want to say that I actually really like the idea of Sonic running through these different storybook-inspired worlds.
You know, like Aladdin and the Magic Lamp. It's the best story of all the Arabian Nights. Or at least the second best.
That's a little on the nose, but okay. One of the strongest aspects of this franchise is the wide variety of locations that you run through to get to your destination. And if this is an excuse to validate elements like dinosaurs and crowded medieval villages, I'm totally on board. What if Mario's time machine wasn't a complete disaster, essentially? Regardless of the actual quality of the games themselves, within this era of Sonic, we got to see a lot of effort made to make these adventures really unique, so I can at least respect that. It's just that, in execution, not so much. Both of the plots are pretty similar. The stories of Arabian Nights and King Arthur aren't going according to plan. So we got a girl who calls upon the help of a blue hedgehog to stop the super threatening bad guy and save the day. And yeah, that's about it. That's more or less the story of both of these games.
Place the ring on your finger.
Like this?
Rub the ring.
Like this?
What's wrong with you? You put a ring on your finger and rub it. What's so complicated about that? Along the way, you'll run into a bunch of other Sonic characters that are all playing the role of a character in the story rather than being themselves. Sonic is the only one here who's actually playing himself. It's like this really massive stage play, and Sonic is the only one not knowing what's going on. It's like one big prank. They all certainly help build upon the world that's being presented in front of you, but they don't really have that much of an impact in these stories since they're treated as the characters they're portraying, not the characters who's playing them. It's not really a big deal though, it's all pretty lighthearted at the end of the day. Except for that one part in Black Knight where Knuckles is about to off himself because you defeated him in battle. Still can't believe I said that out loud. That's a thing. That's a thing in this game. Between that and Sonic wishing for an endless supply of handkerchiefs at the end of Secret Rings, we have a whole lot of storytelling gems here, let me tell you. When directly comparing the two, I'll give the nod to Black Knight. Secret Rings is fine, and the storybook theme for the cutscenes is pretty neat, but it's largely forgettable. At least with Black Knight, the presentation is so much better, leaving a much stronger impression. The storybook cutscenes look a whole lot cleaner, but man, the fully 3D ones, they look great. A whole lot of personality shines through in these, and they're pretty enjoyable to watch. During this few-year span, you can say whatever you want about Sonic games, but their 3D animation here was top-notch. People reminisce about the opening cutscene to Unleashed for a reason, and the 3D scenes in Black Knight are no different. This was also like the first time a Sonic game acknowledged chili dogs. I like that a lot, actually. It's about time. Also, there's a talking sword in that one. Sure? Also in this era, Sonic was making new friends every 20 seconds. That's just a thing he did. So I guess I should inherently be a little bit more annoyed about this, but Caliburn, as he's called, is pretty low-key compared to his contemporaries. So as unnecessary as a talking sword is, considering you spend the entire game swinging him around, surely he's about to get incredibly dizzy. It's fine. It's not a big deal. It's fine. But with all that out of the way, how about the gameplay? Okay, so essentially, Sonic and the Secret Rings is an auto-runner. Credit where credit's due, this was long before auto-runners were even considered much of a thing, so if any franchise was going to try to implement this gameplay style, Sonic's perfect. I guess. He goes forward on his own, and you move left and right by tilting the Wii Remote accordingly and pushing it forward in mid-air to do homing attacks. It's a fine enough idea. You gotta remember, interest was so high in that controller at the time. I can't blame Sega for trying to experiment with it. But he just ends up feeling so sluggish to control. Sometimes the controls just don't cooperate, which is often a problem with the Wii in and of itself, but some of the more minor things, like the speed of turning and the time it takes to come to a complete stop, those are things that you do eventually gain upgrades for, but when you start on a new file, it's trash. And typically, I love upgrade systems. Unleashed had an upgrade system and it was pretty decent there, but here, what? This is really bad. I don't know, isn't the whole idea to take a good character and make him play even better, rather than have a bad character play decent? Going back to the first stage, fully leveled up, is pretty humorous, honestly, but this is still not how an upgrade system should be implemented. Black Knight would forego this idea, and it was for the best. There is a boosting system here, that's kinda neat. Unleashed would go ahead and make it a primary mechanic for the games going forward, but here is kinda where it made its start outside of Sonic Rush, so That's kinda neat. It doesn't really help that for the majority of the game, the levels kind of feel very similar to each other. Outside of the themes of these stages, the things that you do within them to get to the end is pretty much identical every single time. And when the game decides to change things up, it's never really for the better. So, to quote, fix that, there is a ridiculous amount of side missions to complete as well. But unlike previous Sonic games where those extra challenges piggyback off of the existing levels in somewhat interesting ways, these feel just so artificial. Break jars, don't break jars, collect rings, don't collect rings, try and hit this floating guy with a homing attack without breaking your controller in half. This is a lot harder than it sounds. There's also no real indicator on what you need to complete to progress in the story. You kind of just unlock new levels seemingly at random, leading to incredibly poor pacing in an adventure that still only takes a few hours to complete. Sometimes you'll just do a bunch of challenges hoping that one of them is going to be the key to progression, but another time you'll finish a level and then immediately go into a boss fight. It's really inconsistent. The main joy of beating these missions is that typically you just unlock a million extras instead. Yeah, man, you know, showing all of these unlocks individually with that sound effect playing every time, that was a really good idea. And all of these years later, I still have absolutely no idea what the hell a genie egg is. When it comes to the main levels, I honestly don't even think they're all that bad. But you do so much that's not that it makes for an overall obnoxious experience. When we move on over to Black Knight, things don't really get all that much better. If anything, that damn sword makes this entire experience a whole lot worse. Despite the game looking very identical to Secret Rings, it's no longer an auto-runner. You just hold forward on the analog stick instead, and you kinda get the same results. Having that extra bit of control is really nice, and this also frees up your other hand for swinging your sword. Okay, so I know this isn't really that controversial of a take or anything like that, but the sword kinda ruins the whole thing. The stages are just as linear as Secret Rings, and to be fair, the things that you do within them are a lot more diverse, so hey, fair play to them, it is a bit of an improvement. There is just nothing done with the sword that works. What we end up getting is just a barrage of bland level design, littered with enemies that are just there to slash at a fast pace. So hey, at least now you have something to keep you occupied, while the landscapes and swooping camera angles are the main thing that try to make the individual stages stand out. And man, even though we do have analog control now, doesn't make Sonic any less obnoxious. Honestly, the Wii is one of my favorite consoles ever. I don't hate motion controls, but a lot of the times here, you just hold forward, shake the Wii remote, and hope for the best. Even if the sword swinging was attached to a button, it would then just result in a button mashing adventure instead. Hell, you can crap on Shadow the Hedgehog all you want, but at least the gun gameplay sometimes kinda meshed well with the game's speed. There are waggle-fest disasters of boss fights. There's this one stage where you guide Light with the motion controls, which feels incredibly off. You get to interact with these random village people, but that requires you to stand still and do a bunch of button presses so you can donate some of your rings and get some random items in return. It's not fun. Roughly halfway through the adventure as well, Black Knight also includes extra characters to play as. They control slightly differently than Sonic, but it doesn't really change things up all that much, since the core gameplay is as limited as it is. But it's at least a neat novelty nonetheless. They made a big deal out of taking these Sonic characters and putting them in the world of King Arthur. You may as well do something with it. On the surface, these may just seem like bad games. We agree and then move on with our day. But in actuality, there's a lot going on here, and some of it is really admirable, but none of it is fun. And I think that's the best way to describe both games in the Sonic Storybook Series. Aesthetically, things are fine despite being on the Wii, a less powerful console. I think the soundtracks in both games are really good, especially the butt rock in Secret Rings. Oh boy, it is the exact level of bad music that I love. Make beliefs reborn, myths in mind rethought, question all that's known, legends blurred and torn. I'm not really quite sure what that means, but it sounds really powerful. The stories and the personalities of the characters within them are decent enough. Black Knight even has a genuine plot twist, which is pretty cool. Didn't see it coming back in the day. And I can always appreciate when it's obvious that a team was trying so hard to polish these turds with these occasional gimmicks, but if the game itself is a turd, then none of that other stuff really matters at the end of the day. I kinda just think this was simply Sonic's identity at this point in time. You know, there was a whole lot of good that was being done, specifically in aspects like the cutscenes and the music, but when it comes to the thing that is the most important, the gameplay? Sorry man, these games are hot garbage. Oh man, and we didn't even talk about the multiplayer modes. Both games feature them. You got a bunch of minigames and secret rings, and a battle mode in Black Knight. Neither of them are good. You know, I kinda figured we were leaving the Sonic minigame collections on the Dreamcast with Sonic Shuffle, but hey, here we are. There's really not much to say here, honestly. Playing as actual Sonic characters is kinda nice, I guess, but I think at the very least, things would have been a little bit better if they totally stuck with the role-playing idea and you just went full force with that. Playing as the actual characters who were behind the storybook characters, that kinda just makes these feel like total throwaways, an excuse to put 2 to 4 players on the back of the box, and that's it. I know there are some people out there that are really nostalgic for Secret Rings and Black Knight. I get it. Before Sonic Colors, if you only had a Wii prior to 2010, all you had to play were a bunch of Genesis games on the Virtual Console, an extremely cut down port of Unleashed, and these two. And clearly, Sega thought they had something here by dubbing these games the Storybook Series by the time Black Knight came around, and then immediately retired it. It's kinda similar to Sonic 4. We got Episode 1, Episode 2, and just when you thought we were gonna get Episode 3, no. They had their ideas set far too high without having the chops to properly deliver on their promises. We got a bunch of interesting ideas, but that can only get you so far. The Storybook series sits in this weird sort of middle ground of this era of Sonic. You have the HD consoles going really massive in scope with Sonic 06 and Unleashed, and then you have a console like the DS pumping out the Rush titles, and those games were awesome. And then these just sort of happened. They're not good. An interesting part of the Wii's library and the overall Sonic franchise, and we can probably argue which one of these is slightly better than the other, but they're not much more than that. It wouldn't be until 2010's Sonic Colors where things would take a much more drastic shift. But, that's for another time. Until then, can we go ahead and get an endless supply of handkerchiefs in here, please? That'd be awesome.
Like this?